Well, we started out in a little 25-foot trailer because we didn't have hardly any money, and we were in Helena, but we moved around a bit. Our goal eventually was to build our own home, but we had to wait until we had more money and buy the land.
Well, we started out living in trailer houses, which was not too smart because we were making payments on them while they were depreciating. By the time we'd get them paid off, they wouldn't be worth much. So I traded a horse for the land, and I had a cousin that was a builder, so I got him to build the house, and we had to make payments to the bank, but after we got it paid off, it was worth a lot more than what we'd paid for it. So that was kind of a smooth move. Well, that was the problem. My dad was never able to make a living, and we had to depend on my mom. She ran the post office, and we had to live on what she made, which was not very much. So we just did not have any money to worry about managing it.
My mother was really good at handling money, but there were 7 of us, and I never even had a job except for babysitting until I left home. And then I worked at a lodge up at Tinsley for $2 a day. I wasn't taught how to handle money, so after we got married, I had to learn how to.
I just would buy what I wanted to and what I could afford, and I didn't invest any or have anything saved or anything, just had to keep going on.
I remember saving money for a cedar chest, a little cedar chest for my mother. That was the only thing I ever did as far as saving money. I didn't learn until after we were married how to save.
No, I didn't. That was the least of my worries. I just didn't. I'd get it and spend it, or sometimes spend it and then get it.
Probably when Carl would go up hunting, and I had 3 children, and he left me $5. And I learned every time I went to the grocery store that I would just save a little bit, whether it was change or whatnot. That's probably when, and then when I did I started driving beat truck. And at first I gave it to Carl, and then I realized there was things that I wanted, so I started keeping it, and that's when I learned to start saving.
Well, I just never did. I couldn't. I might be able to brag on a few things, but my money management was not one of them, because we didn't have any money to manage when I was younger, so it just had to go with the flow.
Well, we moved around a lot. I helped Carl in hunting camp. We were building fences. We were rodeoing. There was times we just literally lived in a camper with our 3 children. We traveled, and we would take the heads and the meat for the hunters, and we'd take them out to California and take our children to Disneyland, Magic Mountain, SeaWorld, and then bring them on home, stop at the temples to the visitor center. And it was very interesting, and our children learned a lot.
Well, like I say, we just lived in a trailer house and pulled it wherever we needed, wherever I was working. And it had its advantages. You didn't have to, you could just hook onto it and go rather than pack everything up. So it had its advantages, but it sure was no way to invest your money.
When he would leave a little money with me, but it seemed like it wasn't enough sometimes, so I had to learn to save. And then once I started saving, then I had a $50 piggy bank, and when it would get full, then I would take it into the bank and put it in an account. And so at first, because I didn't have much, and then the drive to just save money and have it on hand when I needed something is what happened. Well, we wanted to be in the country, and so we looked around for land in the country. We actually looked for quite a while. We realized that when we found this land here, that it had everything that we wanted, and so we gave the man $800 and a horse for our land. And we had bricklayers in the family, and so Carl had done work for them, so they built our house for us. Took quite a while to build it, but we lived in a little 25-foot trailer with 3 children while they were building it.
Well, I was able to come up with the land. Like I say, I traded a horse for it, but then I was able to come up with about $5,000 on my own, but it wound up costing us about $40,000 altogether. So we had to put the rest on payments, and we wound up paying a lot of interest. But like I say, when we got it paid off, it was worth a lot more than what we had put into it. So if we'd have done that right off the bat, but we weren't really sure where we wanted to live, so we couldn't very well buy any land earlier.
Well, we didn't have one for very long, but we loaned it to his brother, and he ran it up high. And so when I got it back, I just cut it in half. I am not in favor of credit cards. I use a debit card, but I don't like monthly payments at all, and I don't like interest.
Well, that was something that was a disaster, because we just got a credit card for Texaco in the mail, and I thought, oh boy, we got her made now, and I'd go to charging, but I guess what I didn't have figured out was we had to pay it back, and we really struggled getting the credit card paid off.
We had a payment plan with the bank in town, because at the time we didn't have much money, so I drew up my own house plans, and like I said, we had a relative build it, but we were able to pay on it faithfully for 16 years and get ourselves out of debt. And then as we would add on to the house, we would always pay cash for whatever we added on. And so we always stayed out of debt as far as the house was concerned.
Just stayed away from the bank. They gave me a line of credit to where I think it was $25,000. I could just, when I needed some money, I could just call them and they'd put it in my account. But there again, we had to pay it back. If we didn't have to pay it back, it would have been a good deal.
That I don't like interest, and I don't like monthly payments. Even if I would buy a magazine, I'll get it for 5 years. I try everything I can do to keep away from interest. I don't have any credit, and I don't care, because everything I buy, whether it's my vehicles or whatever, I always pay cash for everything. So I don't even need credit.
What have I learned? Well, put your money where it's going to increase in value.
Well, because of my upgrowing, I don't know how I would do it different, because I wasn't taught. I'm just glad that I did learn when I did, and one of our crowning glories right now is we owe nobody and don't have any plans to owe anybody. And I especially don't like owing the bank. because they can take it away from you if you can't make the payments. So I just prefer being out of debt.
Well, that's one of my big problems with raising kids or training horses or anything. As soon as you get it figured out what you ought to be doing, then it's all over. So hopefully sometime I can use what I learned, but I didn't know it at the time.
I've learned that people tell me, how can you carry so much money? Because I do like to use cash, and it's not hard for me. I like to carry a lot of cash, and when I want something, I buy it. I don't want that much now that I'm older. And what I've learned being older is I love giving money away. I love seeing somebody and just giving them money, or I give money to Carl, or I'm like Carl, I like to give it to children, or I like to help out young couples anonymously that are going to school. When our children were quite little, Carl would go up into hunting camp, and we always paid our insurance off of the money he got from hunters. And then a lot of times in the winter, we would have to sell like our pack saddles or whatnot to get through the winter. It took a while before we didn't have to do that anymore. But that's the only thing. Never had anything repossessed.
No, I did when I had a real wreck with the BLM out here in the hills. I was building about 4 miles of fence. They okayed the material before I ever hauled it out, and we drove all those posts by hand in 100-degree weather, and our inspector just kept raving about how good it looked. We had it so straight. You get in line with the fence and all you could see was one post. There might be 7 or a couple of hundred in the line, but when you're in line you could only see one post. We had everything perfectly spaced, and the high ones we'd knocked down, and just couldn't have done them a better. And then we'd plumb them all straight up and down with the ground. Couldn't have done them a better job. And the day we finished driving them, a couple of jerks came out and told me they were rejecting all of the posts. And I said, why didn't you reject them when you came and inspected them? He said, well, we're not even sure these are the same ones we inspected, because they had about 3/8 of an inch. They were out about 3/8 of an inch where they nailed the flange on. I'd pull them just a little bit. And they said, that's causing you to have to bend them to straighten them up. And when you bend them, it it cracks the paint at the top of the ground, and they're going to rot off. And that was clear back in, about in the 1980s, and I'll bet you could go out there now and not find one post that had rotted off. And we went to fighting it. They tried rejecting my wood posts because they were weather checked, and there isn't a wood post dry enough to treat that isn't weather checked. And we went to fighting it. We got the congressional delegation, and just the Game and Fish went to bat for me, and the news media took it up, and we really poured it on, and they finally okayed it. But that old gal that was supposed to be my contracting officer, I called her and right off the bat and asked her to come up and look at it. And she says, no, I am not coming up. My men in the field have rejected it. That's good enough for me. You're going to have to get out there, pull all those posts out, get new material, and start over. And she told me that word for word probably a half a dozen times. And after he put all the pressure on it, she came over and told me, she says, oh, it looks nice. Oh, you did us a nice job. And that's exactly what they were trying to reject. So it really set us back financially, and I had to go around to all my creditors and just tell them that we were in trouble. we'll get you paid off. I'm not saying when. There's no need of taking us to court, because if we had the money, we'd pay you anyway. And it took me up to 2 years, but we got everybody paid off finally.
Well, one thing I remember, Carl came in this house one time and he said, we're going to lose everything. And it really bothered me because I didn't want to lose my house. And so I went to town and tried to peddle my glass etching. Didn't work. And it taught me a huge lesson that this house isn't even mine. It belongs to Heavenly Father. It's here on a loan. And if I had lost it, Carl and we could come up with something and start again. And so it really took it off of my shoulders that this house is just on a loan to me, and that when I die, somebody else will have it. And that's what I learned, is it's just here for us just while we're here.
Well, you've got to have problems before you're smart, and if you didn't have problems, there wouldn't be any point in trying to do better, you know what I mean?
In the past, we had cows, and we would sell them. Carl would go sit in the sale, and he'd buy calves and match them up to other calves. If they were sick or whatnot, he'd take care of them. And then a lot of times we would sell them in the spring when we needed money. As far as the miniatures, they don't really help us make money. They're kind of Carl's toys. And while he will sell them once in a while, they're not really a money maker for us. They're just fun that we can use them in parades and to give them to grandchildren, and they're just kind of Carl's toys.
The climax? Okay, that would have been getting the house paid off and just being able to pay the bills.
Being out of debt.
Well, they probably ought to take a course in money management, for one thing, because that's something I never did learn to do. And just like I say, put your money where it's going to increase in value instead of decrease.
I suggest that they have patience. And if they can buy the land, live as cheap as they can, even if they have to in a trailer house, then buy the land. You can do it pretty cheap, but you have to have patience. We paid our house off in 16 years, but you have to realize this was over 40 years ago before too. But you want to stay away from the interest as much as you can.
Well, I'd try to just learn to manage, take a course in money management and try to put it to use what I learned.
If I was to teach my younger self, I would teach to save, change. People say, well, I don't know how to save. Everybody has nickels, dimes, and quarters. And I learned to save those. I had enough in a piggy bank one time to buy my flight to England. I had over $900. And anybody can save money. Just start small, I don't care, but just learn to, out of every bit of money, once you pay your tithing, pay yourself, and then start saving.
Well, my dad, like I say, he never was able to. I asked him one time if he'd ever made good money farming, and he just shook his head, and this is after he'd farmed for 40 years, and he said there's never been a year that I've got my expenses back. But he could go to an auction, and he'd buy anything that they could get a bargain on, throw it in a truck and bring it home and dump it. When he died, we had about a half mile of road up behind the barn, and on both sides just solid junk he'd bought. So he could come up with money to buy junk, but he couldn't come up with any money to, he wouldn't even buy us a candy bar or a bottle of pop or anything. We just had to work for him for the experience. But on the other hand, we all learned to work. There's never been any of us have to go looking for a job, or any of us, this is my brothers and sisters, we never had anybody ever get fired off a job.
I knew my mother was a good bookkeeper, but I never learned anything from her. And my dad, he was able to manage money. He was able to buy land. He had sheep and cows. He was a farmer, but I was never taught anything by him.
I just tell them to you take a course in money management and pay attention to what they're teaching them.
Have patience. Don't think you have to have the best right off the bat. Pay things for as you go. Don't, if you can stay out of debt, save up. If you do have to go into debt, pay it off as soon as you can. Try and not pay that interest.